and perspectives about transgender military experiences, based largely on a book that was contributed to and written by the panelists that you see before you today. And I'm very, very excited to be part of this discussion and host it. I'm your moderator. My name is Tony Johnson, but you're going to hear only very little from me. The real stars of the show are right here on the camera with you. So a little bit about how this is going to go. We have just an hour really to have an in-depth discussion. We might have some time to go over after a while. So we're going to hear mainly from the panelists, but please, we do have somebody paying attention to the chat. So if you have questions, feel free to put something in the chat. Let me just do a little check here. Can everybody hear me properly, at least the panelists? Great, super. So we're going to hear from them. We're going to hear a little bit about the book. We're going to hear about their experiences, and we're going to get their perspectives on how they've lived through these challenges. And my promise to you today is that at the end of this session, I want you to understand, or you're going to understand, the transgender perspectives on military service. You're going to have a little bit more insight into the challenges that we face as a community and that we face as individuals in this particular space. And you're going to learn a little bit more about what we can do to help support our trans brothers and sisters in this fight, for kind of justice and parity and visibility in the space. So I'm really looking forward to the panel and hosting you as we go. I'm going to say a little bit about who we're talking to tonight so that you understand who's on the camera in front of you. So first we have Máel. Máel is a professor of social justice and social change at Hamline University. They are a veteran of the U.S. Army and the co-editor of the book that we're talking about tonight, With Honor and Integrity, Transgender Troops in Their Own Words 2021. And also, you're the author of several other books on gender, sexuality, and women in the military, and on a don't ask, don't tell policy. So this is the expert right here, folks. If anything you want to know, Mel knows what's going on. We also have with us Bree Fram. She's the co-editor of the book with Mel, and a guardian, right? So for those of you who don't know what it is, she's a lieutenant colonel in the Space Force with over 18 years of experience in a variety of Air Force positions. She's the president of Sparta, which is a nonprofit that advocates and educates about transgender military service and is dedicated to the support and professional development of over 1,500 transgender service members. So thank you for that. It's really very vital service. We also have with us Danny Butler. She's a Marine. She joined the service in 1976 and served in active duty for 22 years and retired in 1998. What an extraordinary service. Thank you very much. She served all over the world, including Japan, Korea, and Cambodia, and she's worked as an Army contractor since retirement. If that wasn't impressive enough, Danny is also a volunteer firefighter and a medic, and she plays the bagpipes in the community band, and she's raised 4 children, has 13 grandchildren and 1 grandchild. Nobody, who can beat, I mean, who can beat all that? Anything else you want to do? Are you like a ninja? Wonderful to have you with us, Danny. Next, we have Commander Blake Dremen. He's a decorated Navy Supply Corps officer with 15 years of service and 11 deployments. He's been on the front lines of major integration issues, including the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Thank you very much, because I was a beneficiary of that. Women on submarines and the repeal of the trans ban. So thank you for those. We also have Hannah Tripp, who is the Director of Operations at the Afghan Medical Professionals Association of America. She coordinates medical and mental health care for displaced Afghans, both in Afghanistan and abroad. She herself is an Air Force veteran and a former AC-130 gunner and a C-5 load mount. That is some no shit stuff, right? And she's worked on veteran issues for Representative Seth Moulton and Congressman Kennedy. And she's also a defense fellow with the Truman National Security Project, of which I am also a member. So thank you, Hannah. We just talked about that. And just a brief word about me. I'm an assistant or adjunct professor at Georgetown in the Security Studies program. I'm a researcher until Friday at the Institute for Defense Analysis. After that, I will join the administration, and I am a Navy veteran and a victor over Don't Ask, Don't Tell, because I'm still here serving. So I'm happy to be your moderator tonight. And so we're just going to dive right into the discussion. First, I want to ask Máel, can you tell us a little bit about how this project came to be and the book?
Sure. And I want to first say, because I will forget, thank you to the Security Studies program for inviting us all to be here tonight. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk with the folks who have joined us. As you mentioned, I spent years doing all kinds of things having to do with gender and sexuality in the US military. And I'd actually moved away from that at one point. But in October 2017, I went to just a little film festival thing here in St. Paul. And one of the topics that particular year was trans-military service. And I'd done some work in that area, but it was nothing that I had planned to do anything more with, partly because in 2016, things looked so good. And I realized as I was sitting there watching these films, and more particularly listening to someone who at the time was serving as an openly trans man in the Minnesota National Guard, and it's kind of embarrassing that it hadn't occurred to me, but in that moment, I thought, wait a minute, June 16, hey, come on in, everything's gonna be great. And I wrote that 16 months later, I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, 3 months ago, Trump tweeted this stuff. How are people managing this? Toothpaste tube. I mean, it sounds cliche, it is cliche, but I just sat there going, how are people navigating this? And I started wondering if there would be anyone who would be willing to talk with me about their experience. And skip all those details, except to say that I ended up doing about 10 interviews, one of which was with Bree, and published just a small, traditional social science journal article about that. And I kept thinking, I want to do something more with this, but I don't want to do traditional social science, making these individuals kind of what we say, the subject of my gaze, the subjects of research. And to be quite honest, I say, as someone who was way closer to retirement than I was to getting started, there were no more promotions for me. I said, I can do whatever I want. And I decided that and this idea came to me really from a book that I had been interviewed for back in 2005. And I thought, can I just be the vehicle, if you will, by which other people can tell their stories, first person stories, rather than me being the conduit of the voice. And in thinking about how this might happen, I had been so taken with Bree in our conversation. And there were other practical things, like I thought, okay, at the time she was a major, and I thought, okay, she's not scratching trying to make her way like someone who maybe as a lieutenant was, that maybe she'll have the time, And so I reached out and we decided, yeah, let's see what we can do. And that was in December of 18. And by April of 19, we had a book contract, which is kind of shocking in the publishing world. But we started putting out feelers, thank you, Sparta, and other avenues, just snowball, contacts, looking for people who would be willing to write personal essays. What we did end up doing, there were a few people who didn't really want to sit down and do the writing, but were happy to tell their story. So we did interviews. And I think this ended up being 2. And then we made that into prose for them. So it's still their voice, but it's understandable that people who don't make a living writing this kind of thing might be a little hesitant. So that was spring of 19. The book came out in November 21. That was not magic. That is lots and lots and lots of emails and work. But 4 people here are, Bree's the co-editor and contributor, and then our other guests are contributors. And my aim today is to just have given you that little bit of overview and step out of the way and let you hear from the people whose lives this really centers on. I will just add, in terms of the question that typically comes up of, well, what was the goal? Simply to get people's voices to be heard. As this, at the time I would say debate, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say debate continues. It's just, to me, feels so critical that people hear first person from those whose lives are impacted by whatever policy we have in place, whether that's inclusive or not. And so that was really the goal, was to create an accessible volume so that your average person who might be interested enough to pick it up would learn something about our trans service members.
Thank you, Máel, for telling us That's very important. We know why we're here, to hear that story. So I appreciate that. I want to knock it over there to Bree as your partner in this project primarily, and ask her to talk about her kind of point of entry for this.
Well, I was thrilled to get the call from Máel, because this is and is an amazing opportunity to tell stories. Because what we've learned as service members, and going through these highs and lows of being able to serve, then being told there's a ban again, and being able to serve again openly, but with an uncertain future, it's the power of story that makes such a difference. And so huge thanks to all the contributors that were willing to go out on a limb and share their story. It's kind of fascinating to look back and in almost an ironic way to say thank you to President Trump for attempting to ban us again, because what that did was shine a spotlight on our service that had never been there before. And these stories got out there, and all of a sudden people cared about them. Because when he tweeted that we as individuals and collectively were a burden and a disruption to the service that should be neither allowed in any way in the military, only about 50% of the American public and 50% of the military thought that transgender people should serve openly. But thanks to that spotlight, within 2 months, public opinion changed dramatically. And that was because you had the story of a transgender drill sergeant in People magazine. You had a transgender military couple on the Ellen Show. And you had folks like us on local and national news all over the place showing that, you know what? We're doing the job here at home and deployed all around the world. And then thanks to the continuing sharing of stories in books like this and in so many other ways, within 2 years, by the time the ban formally went into place, almost 85% of the American public and the military were in favor of trans people serving openly. And it was all thanks to the power of story, just telling that we're here, we're doing our jobs, and we're doing it for the same reasons as every other American who wanted to serve their country.
You know, the former president as a catalyst for positive change is a unique thing. Does anyone else want to comment on that particular perspective? I thought that was an interesting way to approach the situation. Anybody?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of echo off of that, I think one of the important highlights that came for just not trans service member, but for any minority service members overall, is that this isn't doing that population a favor. Like, this service is extremely valuable and needed. This is a national security issue along as a moral issue. So the fact that we have extreme shortages in qualified people, just, I think what really resonated for a lot of people was just not getting to know the person, because it's much harder to hate somebody that you actually know and interact and is a colleague, as a family member, but also the simple fact that we have a dearth of pilots, we have a dearth of experienced military members, and we're having a rate of attrition within our service that is just not being replaced. So the fact that you're artificially removing somebody that is qualified, that is motivated, and already has the skills is something that just doesn't make sense on so many different levels. So I think, you know, Máel and Bree's fantastic work, and just really kind of, I would say that their efforts, more than our favorite previous president, is really kind of been the catalyst for this change too. So I would also want to kind of highlight that, you know, that shouldn't be understated.
Well, I think that's really an important point, Hannah. Danny, you certainly have, you know, the broadest perspective on this and a great deal of experience. You've seen a lot of change, right? And you were there at the beginning. You're going to have to unmute yourself, because I'm going to ask you to talk about that a little bit.
In other words, I'm the oldest person here. I am old enough to collect Social Security, but I'm still working. Anyway, yeah, it was very interesting. There's a couple of thoughts I have in here, because, like, yeah, President Trump's action, that was a catalyst. I was just starting to come out at that time. You know, my activity, I was limiting it to like gay bars or parties with friends I trusted. But that day that they enacted that, I'm like, I had to get out. And so I got to meet with some of the other panelists here on the front lawn of the Capitol that day, trying to represent the many people that couldn't be there. You know, so there's that. Yeah, he helped me on that too. That was my first day out in public with everybody else. When Bree approached me about this book, I was very excited. I was like, oh yeah, I would love to write something for that. And then I started putting my thoughts together. You know, what could I write about it? And after reading the book and seeing some of the other stories and how heart-wrenching they are, I realized I could have added on to it. But, you know, I thought that people would want to read a book that was interesting. And I served during a time that Don't Ask, Don't Tell hadn't even come out into existence yet. Transgender was not a known word. Transvestite was the common term. And if I was found out, I would have been labeled as a homosexual, been given a dishonorable discharge. And at that time in our society, oh no, if you had a bad discharge, you weren't going to be able to get a job anywhere. That's what everybody told me. So for my career, I was closeted. And when I wrote the book, what I shared was the stories of my close calls, because it is kind of comical how I got out of them. At the same time, the inside of me, I mean, the heart was beating way fast. You know, I'm surprised I didn't need a shock, you know, to bring me back to life or something, because the heart just pounding so hard and sweating. Because these close calls, I thought I was about to be outed, and it was scary. So I included that in there with the humor. And fortunately, near the end of my service, I was put on antidepressants for something else. And it wasn't until after my military service, I finally told the doctors what my real cause of depression was. And so writing this book afterwards actually kind of helped with that stage too. We have seen the military come a long way. We did talk about a ban that was put in place, and it's been taken back out again. And we do have to remember that this lifting of the ban right now, you know, another president can come in with a signature of his pen can change it. So we need to be proactive and try to get a permanent change. As Hannah said, it's important for us to be out there, let people know who we are, and just let them see the things we do. And that's why I'm so active, you know, with the bagpipe band, my bicycle clubs, and getting to know people, let them get to know me. And in the book there, I'm hoping people realize, okay, here's a person that was transgender, that did all these years of military service and was closeted. In other words, transgender military personnel have always been in the military, always have, always will, whether you ban them or not. So why can't we just let people be their authentic selves and live their lives? And now I'm going to shut up. I see Bree looking at me.
I think, Danny, I read about your close calls, and I have one that I think it would be fantastic to hear about, but I'm going to let you, we're going to come back in a minute and talk to you about those and give you a chance to share, because I think what I took from those was the fear of service at that time. Now, I was in service right as Don't Ask, Don't Tell was was being introduced. And so I remember how afraid I was at that time. But before we do come back to that, I want to hear from Blake, because Danny talked about kind of the policy that was governing service, and how that was affecting how people felt, their quality of life and their quality of service they were able to render. And you've been on the front lines of a lot of the change that's happened over the last couple of decades. So can you talk to us about your perspective on this issue?
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of different policy changes. I like to say that Secretary Mabus saved my career, because he was the Secretary of the Navy when we repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, when we repealed the ban on women on submarines, and the ban on trans people, and all of which that I've been a part of over the course of my career. And I think the biggest thing is that we have a lot of these policies that are rooted in prejudice, not in reality, and they have nothing to do with what a person brings to the table or how they, their ability to serve their country. And we say it's under some guise of medical readiness, but what we've seen by the service members that we bring is that when you remove those barriers, that they are actually better serving members of the military. They relieve that stress of, like Danny talks about with getting caught. They relieve the stress of feeling that there's something to hide, or that they can't be everything that they can while they're serving. I mean, the last thing anybody needs is to be worried about whether or not somebody's going to go rifling through their stuff and they feel like there's something in there that would cause people to either report them or be judgmental against them because they have this shame attached to what is part of them. And so moving through those policies and then the back and forth, we were lucky in the sense that, you know, honestly, I think we were real lucky in the sense that the previous administration didn't also try to repeal the women on combat restrictions, or like change that back to say, okay, pull all the women off submarines, pull all the women out of infantry units. We don't need you there. And I think had that continued, I think we would have seen that repeal as well, because those are definitely current talking points that everyone is talking about. So I think the back and forth of policies is also a readiness issue, in the sense that, you know, a commander doesn't know which end is up and he has to do everything by policy. And when you're changing the policy on every couple of years to a point where they can serve or they can't serve, do I kick you out? Do I not kick you off? You know, that questions a commander's ability to invest in that service member to make them a better service member, continue to promote, continue to do good things. So all of those things play into how we execute policy in the military, because I mean, even PowerPoint has a policy. So if you don't have that, then people don't know what they're doing. And when they don't know what they're doing, they act, quite frankly, like idiots, especially when it comes to trans people. I always say they lose 50 IQ points when you talk about trans people, because all of a sudden people's minds just blow and they can't do that. That leads to inappropriate questions and all kinds of things. So all of those things need to be addressed, and we need to make sure that those policies are in place and effective based on what they are.
I appreciate that. Like, I do want to say that one of the things that I'll put down this challenge. One of the things that's often raised as a kind of condition of service in the military and in the environment is the commander's prerogative to decide how she or he deals with their sailors, their airmen, their guardians, and Marines. And there's policy, for sure, that is supposed to serve as a guide for how commanders do that, so that there's some transparency and fairness about that. But they do have a lot of authority and power to make those decisions. And so the understanding and getting to understand the issues and the people under their command is really, really important, and being open-minded to that. And so that's what we're working on here by opening the aperture on these things and allowing more people to understand and know. But I think sometimes policy can be used as an excuse and a cover for, you know, bad decisions or hurtful decisions that impact readiness, which is, I think I like the way you frame that, because readiness, which is the how prepared the service is to fight and how it's rotating through the training to make sure that we have the most kind of ready force that we can, is important. So I see that Bree has her hand up. So
yeah, you made an interesting point there about the way a commander sees and frames this issue. And what I think we've been able to do, and we're continuing to try and push, is almost a flip of the script, that when a trans service member is coming out to a commander, the commander shouldn't see it as, oh no, this is a challenge, this is a damage to our unit's readiness. They need to see it like an opportunity. They need to see it as though that service member is coming to them with something to say, hey, sir, ma'am, I want to take this class. I want to go get this degree. I want to go do this thing that makes me the best me I can be. And when you are the best version of yourself, that authentically serving self, not only are you better, but the unit is better. Everyone benefits from that renewed focus on that mission and the ability to go get things done. So we want to flip the script and say, look at this as an opportunity where we all get better, both in readiness and in individual satisfaction, retention, recruiting, so many different dimensions of military service.
So Hannah, how do you flip the script?
I think it's flipped the script, but I also think kind of pushing it back a little bit, but I think policy is instrumental in ensuring that there is transparency and that there is a readiness of forces, because you see this with mental health, you see this with military sexual trauma, and you also see this with LGBTQ's military members, but so much of their career depends on how the quality of the commander. And for issues like this, somebody with a mental health issue that has 15 years experience, 5 deployments, and millions of dollars in training should not be artificially discarded because of the whims of a really poor commander. And that's the same with trans people, that's the same with LGBTQ folks. So I think there needs to be more structure and more oversight from some central authorities to ensure that commanders are able to, quote unquote, use every tool in their toolbox to meet the operational needs, but also aren't able to artificially limit the force through their own prejudices or their own myopic worldviews.
So I think that's really important. And let's go to the expert, the academic expert. Máel, what do you think about what you've heard so far from our panelists?
Well, I got to tell you, I'm always just in awe when I get to listen to the people who I could just say, I don't know, although I don't want to offend the guardian among us, but the people on the ground, if I can use the expression, my work hasn't really dealt with these bigger issues like, institutional readiness and that kind of thing. I was really, my entire career focused on systemic things like the ban, but the effect on the individuals and how that played out. So, listening to it, I find myself nodding and yeah, I totally agree. And I got to say that the issue about command discretion really hit home because of so many, even though my focus was micro, seeing this individual and this individual and this individual and on, and how what happened to them was absolutely a function of one person's decision and how they wanted to interpret regulation or law, whatever point in history we're talking about. So, yeah.
I think, Blake, did you have your hand up?
I did. That was me raising my hand without officially raising my hand. So going back to that with the individual commander discretion thing, right? I was on a ship during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and honestly, the only difference between me when I was on that ship and when I started transition is that I had more hair. I know that there were rumors, and I've talked to that commander, and that commander specifically chose not to engage on whether or not to investigate me for homosexual activity. I know that my commander on the submarine, because I figured nobody knew what transgender was when I was on the submarine in from 2011 to 2015, that nobody knew what that was. But I know for a fact that my commander knew and chose not to report me and chose not to question it, even though he had every reason to do so. And I think part of that had to do with the fact that he knew no one would be there to replace me. So, but at the same time, I still talk to him, and he's still a very dear mentor. Same when I got to the Joint Staff, people knew I was transgender before the policy changed, and they chose not to try and even before the moratorium, and chose not to try and get that. And I say that all in the sense that as an officer, that brings, there is such a difference between how policy is enforced between the officer community and the enlisted community. And generally that enlisted community, that policy is going to be used more as a hammer, and where the officer community, sometimes that policy is used as a pillow. Whereas when I get slammed with policy, I'm not going to take much of a hit. Whereas when an enlisted person takes a hit with policy, they're getting hit in the head with a hammer, and it leaves a lot more. The damage is a lot more severe, and the consequences can be a lot more severe. But it does come down. There are a lot of things that come down to rank, race, privilege, gender. I was perceived as male, so obviously no one question, so I'm easier to swallow when it comes to doing that, and all those things. So and those are big things. And again, commander's discretion. There's so many different ways that commanders could have ruined me and chose not to do so. But again, I have all of those other layers of protection that allowed me to continue versus someone else who may have not had that same level of protection.
Like, I think that was a really important point that you made. I did not have a understanding commander, don't ask, don't tell, when I was forced to resign. So I understand how that can, and I was a naval officer, and I understand how that works. So that's a very good point. But I noted, Danny, that you were shaking your head, that you were either agreeing or you had, so it seems like you have something to say about this, and I want to give you the opportunity to do that.
I just thought it was interesting perspective that the officer advises the enlisted, because I was enlisted, and that was my firm belief. As an enlisted person, you were going to get hammered, and as the officer, nobody cared. And it's interesting because as now I work as a civilian with the Army and work with officers and enlisted, I'm beginning to see a shift away from that. The enlisted are starting to catch some breaks, but it's unfortunate that policy does still exist. And I do appreciate Blake's comments. I don't know if he noticed or not. I was actually starting to tear up at some of the comments there because, yeah, having people go through your stuff and being afraid and being ashamed, they're all realistic comments. And I can remember that and I can associate with that. Oh, Lord, yes.
So while we're on you, Danny, do you want to tell us about a close call or two that kind of encapsulates the moment of what you were feeling at that time during your service?
Oh gosh, there's so many different ones. And it seems like the one that seems to get the most laughs is I was just an E3, a Lance Corporal, and because I was in the Air Wing, we had the privilege of not being in an open squad bay barracks, but we were actually in a little 4-man room. So it was just 4 of us in the room. What a great privilege. And I was a shift worker. I worked in an office that ran 24 hours. So it would not be uncommon for me to have a day off and my roommates would be at their jobs. So I could enjoy that time in that 4-person room when I knew that they were supposed to be at work, and I would enjoy myself. And I had my clothes that were hidden. And I always hid them in the bottom of my laundry bag. I thought that was a safe place. And we were having what they called a JOB inspection. We were told it stood for junk on the bunk. But they would go through and make sure we had all our field stuff laid out on our bed the way it's supposed to be, our rack. And our wall lockers, all the uniforms were laid out. And I actually had a female master sergeant going through my stuff. And I don't know why, but she picked up my laundry bag and pointed to the satin items at the bottom and asked, "What is that?" And my heart was racing. My mind was just clicking 100 miles an hour. What do I say? What do I say? And real quickly, I stated they were victory panties. And everybody in the room looked at me and I just kind of like, gulping inside. And then there was a male gunny that was taking notes. And he looked at the master sergeant and broke out laughing. And then everybody laughed. And so she threw the bag down and that was the end of the inspection. And she walked out in a huff. Myself, good gosh, I think I could have passed out at that moment. But everybody else had a good laugh at that. And I thought I would share that laugh. From inside of me, oh my God, that was terrifying. I thought my life was, my career was going to be over. My family was going to be so embarrassed. And I got out of it. And I don't know, I'm just very thankful for that. The second one as a staff NCO, I just got done with a tour of duty where I could be myself more often. And I went to a school, recruiting school, and we were told, we reported there on a Saturday, and on Sunday evening, we were supposed to report in PT gear in the classroom. I didn't think anything of it, and I wore female undergarments. I was more comfortable. It felt right to me, and I got away with it for years. And I walked in the room, and that's when they announced that they were going to do a weigh-in, and we needed to strip down to our skivvies. And to talk about a cold sweat, and yeah, in my own stupidity, basically PT gear is a Marine uniform. I probably shouldn't be doing it. Again, heart racing. I didn't know how to handle that. I knew that wearing them made, help me cope with life. And quickly I spun the gears, and I looked at the instructor and requested permission to run back to my room so that I could change. And he's like, why? And I says, I need to put skivvies on, which was a truthful answer. I wasn't wearing what they expected. And again, a close call was avoided. And mind you, at that time, good gosh, I think I had 13 years of military service in, and was, that made me much more cautious.
I think that's important. I mean, the kind of general pervasive fear that may only be slightly less at this time for trans people who are serving is a really important thing, because I think people kind of, everything's fine now. We're in a post this and that, post racial, people are, most of society they think has moved along, but there are institutions, military being one of them, on this issue in particular, where there's still problems. People who want to serve can't do so and be themselves in the way that they should be able to. I want to take a moment. So thank you for sharing that, Danny. I want to invite the audience to participate a little bit here, so you guys have a chance to interact with them. And if I call on you because you put your question in the chat, I want you, if you can, to turn your camera on so the panelists can see you while you're asking your question. And when you're done, you can turn it back off. So we're going to start with Helene Sherburne. She has a really good question. Helene, can you ask, please? Thank you.
Hi, yeah, can everybody see me? Okay, I can't see me, but I hope that it's okay. Yeah, just wanted to say thank you all so much. I'm just so thankful to you all for taking the time and for sharing your stories. Was just wondering, as a student, do you guys have suggestions of what we should do to support the trans community, how we can help move the needle in the right direction, just kind of as students, as people who are still really early in our careers and working on the space?
So happy to jump in as a starter, because there are kind of three, basic things that anyone can do to support. One of the things, you've heard our stories, share them. That is critical, as we've been talking all through this about the power of story to make a difference. And when you get the opportunity to speak up and say, yeah, I know a trans person, or I know a trans military person, share that. On our website for Sparta, spartapride.org, we've got some great stories and vignettes of folks, or get the book, share the book. Great way to help spread awareness, and that personal connection really does change hearts and minds. The two other big things are one, call or speak to your elected representatives. We all have that power to reach out and say, I support transgender service. In fact, this summer, we're working on something called the Truman Amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, which would go back to all the executive orders that have brought in folks to the service, dating back to President Truman's integration of African Americans in the late 1940s, all the way through transgender service. So all that's been done by executive order. We'd love to see Congress pass a law that says everyone should be able to serve regardless of their characteristics that don't have anything to do with their ability to serve. Gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity. Those things all can be affected by Congress passing a law. So talking to your representatives, sometimes even that one phone call makes a difference. And the last one is, if you're able, support causes that advance civil rights for all of us, whether that's broad to organizations or that's narrow to LGBTQ organizations or even LGBTQ military organizations. Your wallet talks just like you do in this country. And so if able, those are the three great things to do.
Thank you for that, Bree. Bree brought up Truman as a member of the Truman National Security Project, as is Hannah. I'm going to ask Hannah to comment on what you've heard here in terms of service, policy, and ways that we can support on this issue.
I think money is always, like Bree kind of rightly pointed out, money always talks, but really you can't overstate the value of talking to your elected representative. I mean, Bree, Blake, that's how I first met you two, is on the Hill meeting with various elected officials about trans military service and really kind of bringing a face to the issue. And that, I remember Rob Portman, who is just this, he's not my favorite senator from Ohio, but he and his MLA, even though they made very interesting remarks, ended up coming around on the issue in ways that were really unexpected. But I think one of the things kind of coming from this as a veteran that's important to note is that these policies don't just affect military members, but they also affect veterans. They also affect their family members. When I was working with Congressman Kennedy, we had this poor little girl who was denied all medical care. She ended up being in Germany with, I think it was a strep throat that turned to something really egregious because the doctors on base did not want to treat a trans kid. So they actually had to fly to Delaware to actually get the treatment they need. Myself, I was denied, I had to go to the emergency room and I was denied that coverage because I was on a quote unquote refractory period of a trans procedure, even though that emergency room visit was nothing related to anything regarding my transition. We've seen the loss of rights, we've seen the loss of benefits. We've mentioned discharges, especially for enlisted people. People will get other than honorable discharges, and that has a huge impact about your ability to access healthcare, your ability to get education, the ability to get a job. And I think finally, what's really kind of important to highlight is that this really, in a lot of ways, is an American issue. One of the things that I think in the last year that's been really fascinating for me was a question that I got asked by a reporter. And with my work with Afghans a lot, they asked like, well, what's it been like working with, people from such a religious conservative background? I'm like, I've never had any problems. The problems that I have had come from my colleagues, the people that are veterans, the people that are in the national security industry. And, I think that is kind of an unfortunate testament to kind of where we're at in this country, where really prejudiced viewpoints kind of malign these people as saying, well, they're going to be homophobic, they're going to be transphobic, and they're going to do terrible things, where sometimes your own countrymen are the biggest offenders. But with that, I would say, even though I kind of work in a hyper-conservative environment, once people get to know you, once people get to see what you can do and really see that you can accomplish the mission, it's amazing how quickly people come around and how quickly people become supportive. So I think why this is so important, and I'm going on for a while, and why the efforts of Máel and Bree and everybody here is so important, because it really demonstrates that you are able to accomplish the mission, and you're really able to kind of overcome a lot of these negative prejudices that this is just a man in a dress, or this is just somebody that has a mental health disorder. So
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was going on for a minute.
No. So Bree, we're going to go to you, but we've got two members of the audience I want to tee up for questions.
Yeah, I just want to back on that, because Hannah brought up a real important topic about the stereotypes that are out there for transgender service members and how low the bar is in many cases to break that stereotype. In fact, I had one boss of mine, after I worked for him about 6 months and he was going to retire, say, you broke my stereotype of what a transgender service member was just by showing up to work every day. and getting the job done. I'm like, well, that's a really low bar, but it shows how outlandish the stereotypes about us are, and how easy it is to change that with that personal connection and just show, you know what, we're here for the same reasons as everyone else. We're getting the job done.
I think that's a really important point. And for those of you, I would be remiss if I did not mention my good friend, Assistant Secretary Sean Skelly, who is currently the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Readiness and a trans woman and a Navy veteran. So she is out there in this fight in a very public and high profile way, working on these policies. So I just want to give a plug for Sean, who's also a trim member, by the way, Hannah. And I want to go kick it over to Lindsay Parnas. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, please.
Yeah, you pronounced it correctly. And I've actually emailed with Máel and Bree because I'm on in the Center for Security Studies DEI group. And so my question, which is to Máel and also Bree from the compilations as well, is how have the non-binary experiences that you've heard about, Máel, your experience individually differed from trans female or trans male experiences? And so what are some specificities or similarities for non-binary service people and veterans?
Well, it's actually an easy one for me to answer because contrary to what Danny said, I actually think I'm the oldest person in the room, having served, well, pre-Don't Ask, Don't Tell, let's just say that. And I didn't identify as trans any of the time, whether active service, reserve service, the 22 years that I was in. So my big thing, I mean, was the pre-Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, and then Don't Ask, Don't Tell as law. And that was strictly focused on LGBT issues. But to the contemporary landscape, and I always like to say, you know, Bree and potentially others here as well, far more has the finger on the pulse of day-to-day changes. It's a lot harder for me to keep up with that being outside of the system, but it's an issue because, you know, there may be small, very local level changes, but as an institution, the military embraces the gender binary like nothing you've seen, you know. And we didn't have contributors who wrote about that issue. You know, how people identify within the military may well be very different from how they identify personally, but it's kind of like and I'm not saying this to make light of it, but it's kind of like pick your lane thing right now. I know that there have been rumblings of some little changes, but I think it's very, very challenging when you don't feel that binary fits to you, but that's what you're confronted with in terms of your employment in your life. Yeah, but I would, you know, again, open to, there may be things happening that I haven't yet heard about.
Thank you, Máel. And I just want to take this time because they're not going to do it, so I'll run the commercial. You can get the book now on Amazon, and I think the link's in there. The paperback will be out in November. So for those of you who don't like hardcover books, I do like them. So you can see it. They're here, they're downstairs. The paperback will be out in November. It's a really great book. You should get it. But I want to go to Eamon Bradford to ask a question here. And then we're going to go to kind of a lightning round. So prepare yourselves, panelists. Over. Eamon.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for speaking with us. I was curious about the VA component and how do you feel about their role in supporting and providing service to the transgender community?
Yeah, I have a lot of familiarity with this in both a personal and professional level. I think it's very disparate. I think there are some components in the VA that are astounding, and I have had amazing care at the VA. And I think, like with any veteran, I've had also just absolutely horrible experiences that really kind of make me very nervous to go to the VA. I would say that there has been a forward momentum. 2016 really was a roadblock to a lot of progressive policies that were going to be implemented. But I think we've been seeing a lot of forward progress on discharge upgrades and discharge reviews for people that were discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and other discriminatory policies. I think we've seen greater access to care, and I think we've seen a greater accessibility of care for transgender and non-binary folks. The one thing that I am a little frustrated with, because it was so close to being enacted in 2016, was the ban on gender confirmation surgeries. That is something that is quote in the rulemaking process right now, but it's taking a lot longer than I think it reasonably should be, and it's a lot more controversial than it really should be. But I'll save that rant for another time.
May I add?
Oh, I think we may have.
I have
it's
lots
me,
of
I'm
experience
frozen.
with the VA also, and I wanted to share, that in case there's veterans out there, let them know each major VA center has a LGBTQ coordinator. And if you have any problems, go to them and they will help you. The My Healthy Vet, they got a secure email system that they check everything. And every time you send them a message, it's like starting a stopwatch. So communicate with them on that. I've had some good care. I've had some interesting incidents that were very embarrassing. I just wanted to share. Hannah's right, but it's like any government agency. They got policies and you have to know how to work the system.
Just to really piggyback, and I'm coming this from working as a congressional caseworker, but some VAs are better than others. And if you're not able to get satisfactory care from a coordinator, go to your congressional representative, because they can really fix a lot of problems. I think the key point is you don't need to solve any of these problems alone, whether it's in the VA or outside of the VA, or just another service member or veteran.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that question, Eamon. Okay, so we're coming down to the kind of final 5 minutes. We might have a little time afterward, but I want to be respectful of our panelists' time. So we're going to do kind of a lightning round, and so this is a question that I want each of you to answer in your own way, and that is to tell us, the audience, something that you either think is urgent that we should know, that is underreported that we should know, or that is misunderstood that we should know. So urgent, underreported, or misunderstood. Those are the 3 options, and you can choose any one of those things. And in a sentence or 2, tell us what that is, and then we'll just go around the horn. So I'm going to start with Máel.
Okay, I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna say, in terms of urgent, which may not be quite the right characterization. I can't believe that anyone who would join us today is unaware of Justice Thomas's concurring opinion in the Dobbs case. And I would say pay very close attention to what he's asking for in terms of the reversal of the Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell cases, because the big picture that there seems to be significant interest in from certain corners has the potential to put things like the open military service of trans people at significant risk. And don't underestimate the effort that may well go into changing some of the things that we have now seen come out of the court and thought were going to be there for our lifetimes. So thanks.
Hannah.
I mean, really, to echo that, Lawrence v. Texas is something that was specifically highlighted, and those were anti-sodomy laws. And I worked plenty of discharge upgrades that you see people have their careers, lives, go to jail for just loving who they love. I would say, outside of Friday's fun decision, one of the things I think is most misunderstood is people just assume that being trans is such a big part of my identity, where it really isn't. And especially in my professional sphere, it's really kind of not part of my identity. It's not really relevant to my work at all. Like it's good for people to know, but it isn't something that I'm going to be trying to like push on people or groom people or advocate for one way or another when I'm trying to get healthcare like for a population. So I think it's really important to focus on the individual and not the label, because I think sometimes people will just assume that because if you're part of this small population that everybody is homogenous and everybody's the same, and not really focus on kind of the aspects that really make them incredible, even though being trans is incredible too. But
Okay, thank you. Danny, urgent, underreported, or misunderstood?
That's a tough question. And, to me, I think a lot of people, I'm going to go with misunderstood. Almost everything that we have issues with today is because of how we were raised. And for myself, in coming out, one of the hardest parts for me to accept myself was my own upbringing. And when I finally accepted myself, I had to look at the church that I had been brought up in. And then I realized that I had been taught prejudice and hate. Not only had I been taught it, but I was guilty of it toward the LGBT community. And it was like a light opening experience for me. When I finally accepted myself, I realized that, not only had I had trouble accepting myself, I had trouble accepting others, and I felt terrible. So, don't be afraid to stop, and don't be such a hard thinker on things sometimes. Look back and just say, wait a minute, maybe I need to think about this a little bit longer.
Thank you. Blake.
So I had to think about this for a minute, but I do find that I did get it. Misunderstood. You can't change an organization you're not a part of. So if you don't choose to be involved in your local government, then you can't change it. If you don't choose to be involved in your state government, you can't change it. If you are appalled that the military has these policies and you're not a part of the military, you are shit out of luck, pardon my French. And it is going to be a lot harder for you to change any of these organizations from the outside. And I think that is, my cry. Use the sphere of influence that you have, whether or not it's just the friends that you have, calling them out if they misuse pronouns of someone that's not there, or doing those things, being those allies, and really taking to heart that in order to bring about the change you want to see, you have to be a part of the organizations to do so, including voting. So no, not voting, I don't believe in it. No, everyone needs to vote.
Thank you, Blake. Bree, urgent, underreported, or misunderstood?
So I'm going to circle back to what Máel kind of started with, and that the Roe decision is not the only one that is really affecting national security. It is fascinating and scary to see how local and state laws are becoming a challenge to federal laws and the stationing of military members in certain areas, because we now have this patchwork across the country that was expanded dramatically with the recent decision to include most women, about where do service members feel safe being stationed. And we certainly saw this, for decades on racial issues, but now we have, where can LGBTQ people be stationed, or with families with LGBTQ dependents, where can they be stationed and feel safe? Where can women be where they feel that they're going to be able to get the health care that they need? That is a national security issue that is being affected by state and local laws, and the services are going to have to figure out how to deal with it, and that's hugely challenging.
I think that is really that's a very important point that you just made there, Bree. So thank you. Okay, so we've come a little over time, but I want to give Máel the last word as we come. And first, before we do that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank the panelists for your candor and for sharing. And I want to thank the audience members for coming and joining us for this really, really important conversation. So as we close out tonight with Máel in the last word, I want you to remember these remarkable people and what they represent in terms of the potential and the danger that we face now for readiness and our military service members and their quality of life. So Máel, over to you for the last word.
Well, first, thanks, Tony, generally speaking, not just for throwing the last word at me, but I can never overstate my gratitude for, the four folks here and everyone who contributed. And I guess, and I do not mean this at all in a self-serving way. This is academic publishing. Buy the book, read the book, go to your library. My partner's a librarian, patronize your local library, but read these stories and then share them with others and talk about them. That would really be where I'd want to end. And thanks to everyone who joined us today as well.
Thank you, Máel. Okay, folks, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate your participation and your eyeballs and your ears. Buy the book. November, you got paperback. Now you got hardback, so you can do all the things. You can get it on Kindle too, which is also very, very useful. I'm waiting for the Audible version too, so we can get them all. But thank you all for your service and for your continued commitment to helping our lives better, get better, and helping veterans in the military service be better too. Have a good night.